Hello and welcome. This is a lesson on rivers and watersheds. Get ready to learn about rivers and watersheds. Did you know rivers are important to cities and commerce? Most often you'll find a river next to a major city. It's because of the access to transportation. All rivers empty into the oceans. They all go downhill. So anything that goes in a river eventually winds up in the ocean. Drinking water comes from rivers. So in a lot of cities, they'll take their drinking water out of the major rivers. Sewage treatment plants empty back into the rivers. It's good to be upstream of the sewage treatment plant, but there's another city or town upstream of you. Hopefully it's clean when they put it back in the river. Why is this important? Well, rivers can become polluted. Many different reasons for having pollution in rivers. Rivers change the landform. They actually change where you live. We need to manage water flow so we don't have floods. Electricity is produced from hydroelectric dams. You hold back the water, collect it in a reservoir, and then send it out through a turbine, which turns an electric generator, makes electricity. And products are shipped by rivers. A lot of transportation is by river. Now, what's important to know about rivers and watershed? Here are the parts. Rivers start something called a headwater or a rivulet. It's a little stream. Sometimes it comes right out of the ground. So the headwater is the start. Several of these might combine to form a stream. And these streams, you can see the little ones turn into bigger ones, and the bigger ones turn into larger even. These are called tributaries. They add to rivers. One way to remember this is they contribute water to the river, so tributaries. Once you get a couple of streams and being tributaries, they form a river. And the river leads into the bay, and the bay feeds into the ocean. Now, parts of the river. Here we go. We've got headwater is the source. These are the rivulets. You've got tributaries. They add to the rivers. They contribute. Then you have streams, rivers, bays, and they all empty into the ocean. So we have the headwaters, tributaries, streams, rivers, bay. That's the Chesapeake Bay right here. Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, this area of the map. River load. Now, mud, leaves, and debris in the water flows downstream. This material created by river load, mud, leaves, and debris, swept downstream by water, and you can see the muddy water here, form a delta. Water slows when it enters a bay or a lake, and the river load doesn't get carried downstream anymore. It slows down and it deposits, or it falls to the bottom, creates something called a delta. You can see the river, and then all this material used to be somewhere else. So the river load, the muddy part of the stream or river, deposits when it meets a larger body of water. Forms something called a delta. And the reason it's called a delta is it's shaped like a triangle with a Greek letter delta. River growth. As you can see here, this land is being chewed away by the river. You can see here, let's look. Here's a river. It goes all the way around and comes back. At one time it was straight. But river banks are being worn away by running water, as you can see here. Tributaries add more water, and they change the face of the river. Now, all these rivers feed into the bay and feed into the oceans, but anything dropped, say we pour a cup of water out here, it's going to eventually make it into this river, go downstream, and eventually be in the ocean. All water that falls in a watershed, that's what we're talking about, the water sheds off into this river, flows down into the river. All the water that falls in east or west or north of this river will eventually fall or go into the ocean. It takes the materials from the land, leaves, twigs, manure, water that comes off with fertilizer from farms, can carry industrial pollutants downstream, can carry animal waste. That's why there are laws about keeping animals away from rivers. But eventually, everything that flows, any water that's put on the ground, eventually flows into the river and then flows into the ocean. That's a watershed. That includes rainwater, by the way. Now, the continental divide, it separates watersheds. It runs north and south in the United States. Here's a picture of the continental divide. Anything that falls, let's go back. Anything that falls here will go to the Pacific Ocean. Anything that falls here will eventually wind up in the Atlantic Ocean. This is the continental divide. It's on the top of a mountain, and as you can imagine, anything falls goes downhill. Estuaries. An estuary is an area where freshwater and salt water mix. It's home to spawning grounds of many animals. It's where they give birth. And when the fresh water meets up with the salt water in the bay, this area where they mix is called an estuary. And there are some animals that just live there. And this is very fragile. Too much fresh water moves the estuary downstream. Not enough invades the land with salt water. Flooding. Flood is too much rain at one time. Has nowhere to go. Water runs over the riverbanks and goes where you don't want it. A meander. Remember before we talked about these bends in the river. Here's what happens. Water erodes material on the outside of a bend and deposits it on the inside. So at one time, this river ran straight. But if a rock or a tree fell here, it would cause the water to move around it. As the water moves around it, the water on the outside of the river, or the outside of the river bank, flows faster than the water on the inside. And over time, it starts eating away and depositing the material from the outside to the inside, eroding the river away. Think of it walking around a racetrack. If you walk around the inside, it's less distance. You would have to go faster to go around the outside of the track. And this causes something called a meander, because it seems to just go back and forth instead of going straight. So the water travels faster on the outside of the bend than the inside, and takes material away. So why is this important? Rivers can become polluted. Rivers change the landform. We need to manage the water flow. Electricity is produced from hydroelectric dams. And products are shipped by rivers. So there's your lesson on rivers and watersheds.